Hello and welcome back to our CAD clip lessons on Revit structure. And just a quick tip before we get into our grids lesson. Something that I kind of take for granted and I realize some people don't know. When you're closing down a file, if you hit the X button over here, all it does is close down this window. I've got several windows that are open as you go through your project navigator and open up different views. If you hit this, it just opens that view, and that closes another view. Closes, and another one, etc. If you want to close down the whole project, you go Window, Close, and that actually closes the whole thing. So just thought I'd mention that. Now let's start our grid lesson. I'm going to hit my default project template button there and start up a default file. And grids work very much like levels. They're datum points. Things are tied to the grids, especially structural objects. I use grids all the time. When I'm teaching a class, sometimes people say, it's a small project, etc., etc. I don't need grid lines. Always use grid lines. I mean, it doesn't matter even if you're, designing a doghouse, which I spend a little bit of time in these days. You should always use grid lines. So as you draw grid lines, I'm going to pick on my grid command over here on the left. I can either draw the grid line by picking points. I can use my pick objects to pick existing edges of objects as my grid line. I can form a line segment. I can draw two different types of arcs, and I can offset from wherever I pick. And I can, if I have more grid bubbles in my type selector, I can do that. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to pick a point here, and I'm going to drag a point and click up and click it. And then, by default it starts with 1 because it's the first grid line in the project. I'm going to hover down here. I don't have to worry too much about where. Click up. It's going to sequentially put 2 in there. I'm going to move over here, draw another one, grid line. And of course they have to be straight, right? I can go wherever I want. Click on there. Now I'm going to go across this direction. I'm going to drag. After I place it, I'm going to pick right inside the circle, and I'm going to change that to be an A. And then I'm going to hit an enter. I'm going to go down over here, use my nice green align tools, drag across, pick. It's going to put a B because the last one was an A. Okay. And then click over here, align, hit escape. Okay. Then once I have those, I usually go in and put some dimensions. So I'll throw some dimensions using my dimension tool. We'll do more lessons on this later. Okay. Dimension, click, click, click. I'm going to slide up and click nothing. Boom, places it. Still in my dimension command, click, click, click. Go in the middle of nowhere land and place it. Hit escape. Okay. Now I can use those dimensions to drive my model. So I can say, okay, well, let's start with grid line 2, and I'll change that to say 20 feet. Moves that grid line over. Then I can go over, click on this, make it, highlight it, click on here, make this 22 feet, enter, moves that grid line. Okay. Any columns or beams that are on there are going to move with it. Okay. Now I can take this guy and I can take my object or my grip, and then I can click on that and slide that over. Okay. If I look from my south elevation, this guy over here, boom, boom, there I have my objects inside of there, and there's my level lines. Going to use that to modify that, maybe bring that over to there, slide over, grab that, tighten that up a little bit. There I have a crossing of my grid lines and my level lines. Go back to my level 2, zoom out a little bit. Now, same as with my level lines, I can click on a grid line and I can hit my break button. I can slide this guy up and over, and I can move this up and down. Now, remember we learned a little bit about that 2D, 3D. Watch what happens here. I'm going to make another elevation. I'm going to take this elevation, I'm going to rename that. I'm going to right click and rename that, and I'm going to call that south elevation. Now that's my south elevation. If I go back to here, I can see it says south. Okay. I'm going to add another elevation looking in the other direction. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to go to my view, and I'm going to say elevation. Okay. And then I'm going to place that elevation here and hit escape. Then I'm going to take that elevation and I'm just going to rotate it around that way. Hit escape. Now I'm going to pick on here, and I can see that there's my elevational line. Okay. Click on here. You can see there is my elevation line for that one. So I want to click on there, and I probably want to drag that out to be a little bit further. Now I'm going to go down to my elevation here, and I'm going to rename that to be north. Double click. Now I'm going to double click on my north elevation, and I'm going to do a little demonstration here. Watch what happens. Here's the south elevation. Look at grid line 3. Okay, I'm going to change this to be 2D. Now I'm going to take grid line 3 and I'm going to drag it way up in the sky. Okay, now when I go to my north elevation, grid line 3 is still down there because this is 2D, not 3D. The 3D bubble is way down there. Okay, if I click on here and I drag this down, watch what happens. Bunk, now it becomes 3D. Now if I click on it, okay, I'll take the lock off it, but I'll unlock it, but I'll drag it up. Now watch what happens when I go to my north elevation. I'm dragging this because I'm dragging it in 3D. If I click on here, okay, I drag it down halfway and click out, go back to my south view. There I'm controlling that in 3 dimensions. And this is easier explained here sometimes than with the level lines, but the level lines work exactly the same way. Watch what happens. Drag it down. Boom, now it's going to lock itself to those. So now if I take this line and I move them up, they're all locked and they're in 3D. Click out, back to my north elevation, they're all getting dragged up. Now maybe I want to take that one in the middle. I'm going to unlock it and make it 2D. Now I can drag that 2 down to here, click out, go back to my south. It's not affected, okay, because the other one was done in 2D. When I click on here, it tells me the 3D one is up in there. If I actually drag that down, okay, watch what happens in my south view. I'm dragging it down, so I have it in the south view, it's here. In the north view, it's down here, and these guys are locked in 3D up there. And because they're locked, don't get the lock mixed up with the 3D. 3D means different view angles. The lock means lock it with whatever is aligned. Back on here, I click and I say, oh, the 3D one is up there. If I drag that up and I let go, boom, now it's back to being 3D. If I click on this and I drag it all the way up in the sky and I go back to my south, I've dragged it up there. Okay, so there's kind of a good lesson. Now that I've dragged it down and I've locked it, I can go to any view and grab any one of these because they're all set to be 3D to start with, and they're all locked, which means if I drag one, I drag them all. The other thing is if I do a dimension, I go to basics and I add a dimension, click once, click twice, click 3 times, slide to place it, hit escape, escape. Dimensions top to the end, watch what happens. If I click on here and I move this, it's going to move the dimension with it. Even if I have another string of dimensions, I'm going to grab this dimension, pull it down there. I'm going to do another dimension from here all the way here overall. I'm going to go in the middle of nowhere and place it, hit escape, escape. If I click on here and I pull this, okay, dimensions move with the grid lines. Okay, and I can take this and use my nudge, my arrow key, and nudge that up and down. Same as if I go back to my level 2. Okay, click on here, maybe move that back into there. Okay, now I'm looking in plan. Same type of thing. If I want, you know, there's my level 2. Well, watch, here's my level 1. If I click on here and I say, no, you're only 2D, and I drag this one grid line out, and I go to my level 2 is back here because this is where the 3D one is. Okay, if I go back to my level 1 and I click here, look where my hollow circle is. I would need to pull this down, drop it in there. Now it's back to being 3D, and now it's aligned. I can click on any one of these, and if I slide those out and I go back to my level 2, I'm also controlling them and the dimension lines. Okay, if you actually take this and pull this down far enough, I think it'll start, it won't. Oh, it's still pulling that. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so that's still, even though it's way down there, is still listening to that. Click on here, pull it back. Okay, so a little lesson on the locking and unlocking the 2D and 3D aspect. Okay, you have to go to the 2D guy and drag him down to the 3D guy, and then again they'll lock in. So that's grid lines, and again this works the same way. Check mark on if you want to put a bubble on the end of these. Okay. Pick on here, add my bubbles. Can I do more than one at a time? No, I cannot. Have to do them individually. Show me a bubble, show me a bubble, show me a bubble. Okay. Very quickly, dimension, click, click, nowhere land, place it, click, click, slide in, place it, hit escape. Okay. Maybe grab this, tighten it up a little bit down to here, pick over here. So that philosophy of locking in 3D works with grids and with levels. Now, the beautiful thing about having our grid lines in here, of course, I should actually do one more grid. You can do a grid line